think the problems that confront us now can be summed up with the idea that we no longer need to worry about what will happen in the future. The future is here. We need to worry about how to reshape it in a more humane and perhaps human scale image. But our next guest will talk to us about that and more, perhaps. He is one of our leading thinkers and writers about technology and society. He is also a technologist himself. He's a computer scientist. He is sometimes referred to as the father of virtual reality, although patrimony may be hard to prove. And he certainly has done a lot to earn that title. He's also a composer, and he is the author of a number of books, including You Are Not a Gadget and Who Owns the Future, and his latest, The Dawn of the New Everything. He joins us now, Jaron Lanier. Jaron, thanks for coming on the program.
Well, thanks for having me on.
I have to say, it's always great. First of all, it's great to talk to you. And secondly, I am enjoying this book so much. I really am getting so much out of it, just as reading and a different perspective on technology and life and your life. It's a kind of combination memoir and reflection on the rise of virtual reality. At points, I will give you what is, for me, the ultimate writing compliment. I will say at points it's almost Blakean, and by that I mean William, not some other Blake. I love this line from it. Was it possible that every place in the universe was wondrous, but people just get worn out by the chore of perception? If the doors of perception be cleansed, we would see everything as it is infinite.
Oh yeah, I guess maybe so. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. So, and what I love too about the book, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, is the interplay between your own sensorium growing up and your own love of technology and the arts, and how that came together with the desire to create virtual reality. It's almost, Kierkegaard said, life can only be understood backwards, but it has to be lived forwards. I felt like everything in your childhood was converging on this moment when you decided to work on virtual reality. Am I reading too much into it?
No. Well, I mean, the book asks a question about the relationship between neoteny, the process of growing up, the way people have extended childhoods compared to other creatures on this planet, and the process of building and understanding technology, and the process of Silicon Valley itself growing up, and the process of improving science. It's trying to compare these various forms of ascent and then trying to consider what that means to some concept of ethical or moral ascent. But I feel like if I talk about it that way, it makes it sound like some kind of intellectual, boring thing. And so I hope it isn't that. I hope it's a fun book. But no. It's definitely examining this sort of comparison between different ramps upward.
Yeah, and I think it really is a fun book. It's a great read, as we say in the trade, and I want to talk. We could talk about your childhood, but I think virtual reality as a starting point is the ideal way to go, because I think people by now, most people know what virtual reality is. In a sense, they know perhaps about Oculus Rift. They know about putting something on your head and it simulates moving around in space, and then maybe you have gloves and you touch things. But you have a different definition you have multiple definitions of virtual reality, which in itself is a kind of virtual reality, I suppose. But one of the ones I like best, and maybe it's your first one, is imagine a U-shaped, a person-shaped hole in the universe. Then the contours of that hole, whether it's this universe or an imaginary one, or an alternate one, the contours of that whole are what virtual reality is. Did I get that sort of right?
Well, I mean, you can imagine that virtual reality technology could be conceived as trying to replace the boundary between you and the rest of the world with a simulation. It's one of many interfaces I give because virtual reality can be understood on so many different levels. It can be understood in those terms. It can be understood in terms of cognition and perception. It can be understood culturally and as a metaphor in various ways. So what I try to do is approach it from all these different dimensions because I don't think it has any single definition. It's a bit of a vagary, I guess.
It is obviously it's an elusive target, and
Uh-huh.
it triggers all sorts of philosophical implications. But let me tell you a quick story, and maybe this will be the platform for it. When I was really young, I was in bands that opened for, the Ramones and people like that. And I remember I was at an insurance convention in San Francisco,
Yeah.
and a whole group of brokers had a big screen TV with Rock Band, I guess it is, the software where you pretend to play instruments,
Hmm.
and it's sort of, and they were being the Ramones. And I'm usually a very polite person, but I couldn't resist sort of looking in and saying to them, rock and roll is now officially dead.
Yeah.
And the guy looked back at me and said, no way, dude, we're keeping it alive. And I realized that at some level of passion, however informed or uninformed, it was a living experience for him. And even though it wasn't virtual reality and that it wasn't three-dimensional or immersive, but it gets to the question of, I hate to sound overly like sophomorically profound, but it gets to the question of what is a reality to begin with. And I don't know the answer, but and you probably don't either, but you must have wrestled with it in your virtual reality work.
Well, there are two different things that I would respond to in what you just said. One is how should we think about something like Rock Band? Is it a diminution of music or not? And one thing to be clear is that there's ways of doing music with technology that are not um, as restricted as Rock Band. I mean, the problem with Rock Band for me is that it puts people into a little system of possibilities that were defined by a programmer. It's not open-ended. It doesn't have some kind of infinite bottom to it that goes to the base of reality, which is, I think, what you want in life. It puts you into a constricted, finite system instead of the mysterious infinitude of reality. And so that's my problem with it. I don't have a problem with using technology in music, certainly, and there are ways to do it that are direct confrontation with reality. And um, I'm also a little concerned about the role of nostalgia because I think we've lost a sense of optimism and joy in the future lately because we're kind of in dark times. And so we tend to, even in the highest tech things, have this focus on nostalgia, which the Rock Band game is a great example. And there's something to me I mean, it's not bad in and of itself, but just the overwhelming dominance of nostalgia is depressing right now. And then you brought up the question of the definition of reality, which is a whole other thing. And once again, as with virtual reality, the book contains many approaches to defining what reality is. And I don't think there's any single one. I think I call it the thing that pushes back the mandatory thing and all kinds of other definitions. Um, and I enjoy the uncertainty of these definitions, the fact that there isn't one that's definitely right, and that we can get better and better at understanding reality, but it's quite arrogant and foolish to think that we've totally gotten there.
Yeah, and we don't have all day. I would just throw that out there. The but I love this point about nostalgia because we're talking about virtual reality, but I remember having a conversation with someone about playing in cover bands, that do all Beatles or all Stones or all Tom Petty or whatever. And I remember quoting William Blake, the patron saint, apparently, of this conversation we're having today. William Blake saying in the gendered language of his time, I must invent my own system or be enslaved by another man's. And I guess one of the things about that conception of the rock band, if you will, conception of virtual reality, the nostalgia based, is that it's living the life of another and expressing creativity through the creativity of another, which gets to the whole question of how virtual reality technology can be used to explore and discover, which is what interaction with live universe reality is supposed to be about. So the theme of exploration, as opposed to boundaries, just circling around, making infinite circles in a little bounded track of, well, there was the Beatles and whatever, discovery and creativity, I guess. Those as goals for virtual reality. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for virtual reality, I mean, any um, any loving definition of it, anything that loves people and believes that people are important, should define virtuality as something that people do, that they create with, that they explore with, and not as something that's done to them. Virtuality has, at the very least, a dual identity, and this is something I write about in the book quite a bit, that on the one hand, it could be this amazing and exquisite new medium for expression and sharing and connection. I almost hate to use the word sharing because it's been so corrupted by the tech industry, so scratch that. But virtuality can also be the ultimate behaviorist manipulation box. It can be the ultimate behavior control mechanism. And in some ways, I think we're fortunate to have lived through, let's say, the manipulations that led to the last election and this sort of trace of mind control that we have with current social media. Because when we get to more intense forms of digital media, whether virtual reality or other things a little closer to it, but not quite there, this problem of the manipulation of people by other people will become much more acute. And what we have to do is get our act together before we get to that point, because I think there's a sort of an inevitability to information technology evolving to be more and more intense. And we can get into whether it's possible to step back or not, but I'm of the opinion that it's not possible to step back. I think we have to rather prepare ourselves to not be fooled by it. So, the object of being creative in virtuality should be not just that it's good in its own sake, but once you can be the master of a medium, you're no longer as likely to be mastered by it. So the fact that you take an essay writing course when you're in high school or something doesn't mean you'll be a professional essayist, but it does mean that maybe when you read something written by somebody else, you have a bit of a sense of what it's like to write something and a bit of a sense of what makes a reasonable essay or a stupid one. And right now, people don't have any background like that for this primary media of experience of their life, which is the stuff coming over the smartphone, the social media and all that. It's as if it just came from some other higher dimension. They don't have a feeling of being on the same level of it, of owning it. And I think they're just more easily manipulated. And the society must form some kind of new sense of literacy in which people aren't so easily fooled and manipulated by this stuff.
And I think that's such an important point, and it gets to, but you said something in setting it up, since the people who are creating and generating this technology, we did a feature on this program a few weeks ago on this sort of the new dissident tech world of people who really want to make sure the tech is used more humanely. But I feel there's a dominant ideology still in what can loosely be called the Silicon Valley world. And I feel, you said something, if you believe that human beings are valuable and important, or where's that effect? And I'm not sure that that's a given for everybody who's creating these tech platforms right now.
Yeah. Well, look, Silicon Valley there's diversity in it. Everybody isn't the same. So if you want to talk about the worst people in Silicon Valley, we can talk about some truly abhorrent ideas. And to some degree, there's this emergent persona of the worst of the tech world, which is characterized by the Uber guy who was kicked out, or by maybe the pharma bro, or some of these other hyper entitled and yet hyper insecure men who are inherently, they feel themselves to be infinitely privileged and yet infinitely under assault at the same time, and infinitely smarter than everybody else and yet infinitely vulnerable. They live in this bizarre pincer of the worst of the human psyche, and they do great damage. But everyone in the tech industry is not like that. There are plenty of other points of view. So on the one hand, like an example of a horrible thing I hear, and I've heard this at dinner parties in Silicon Valley in the last few months. Somebody will say, it's a fortunate good thing that we have the opioid crisis in America, because it'll start to just kind of sedate all those people who are about to put out of work when the trucks start driving themselves and all that. Like, let's just keep all those red state people, sedated. So this is a great thing. And I'm like, what? That's a horrible thing to say. Like, what an awful, awful thing to say. But on the other hand, I have to say, recently I've been very engaged with this idea of trying to come up with an alternate way to think about the rise of digital systems in society. So the usual way is that we think of the systems as becoming intelligent. We have this idea called AI, which I think is a horrible way to conceive of software. And then the idea is that it'll put people out of work because it'll just automate the stuff that people would have done. And what I've been trying to point out is that AI only works with data that comes from people. So if we acknowledge that, and that the people are still needed in order for the AI to work, it's no longer really an AI, it's just a program. And if we could pay people for their data, we might be able to create new kinds of jobs. And a lot of those would be what were traditionally blue-collar roles that would transfer into the data space. And I can give you some examples in a second, but there's a way to think of this that's more human-centric, that doesn't have to lead to economic dislocation and doesn't have to always end up with hyper-concentration of wealth and power around whoever owns the biggest computers. And anyway, so I've been talking about that for a long time. I started, my big pitch was the book Who Owns the Future, which was 5 or 6 years ago. And just recently, I've really been getting a tremendously warmer and more interested reception in Silicon Valley. A lot of people are interested in it because they realize we're destroying the world. They realize we have to find a different way. And I'm actually feeling more optimistic than I have in a few years about it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And again, we're talking with Jaron Lanier, author of the new book, The Dawn of the New Everything. And one of the reasons why we did a segment recently on, this rising new tech perspective is precisely because it does seem to be on the rise. And I'm glad to hear of your optimism, because I feel, I've been saying for a long time that if a lot of jobs are going to be automated out of existence, then on the economic level, we need to do something to address inequality, so that once again the benefits of technology will be shared on a more democratic basis. But I think you could make the same argument. I think you are perhaps making the same argument about attention, about the work output of people. It's not just a matter of salaries or wages, but it's literally a matter of the amount of time interacting with the technological world and what you provide into it, the being acknowledged for that, and democratizing that. Is that a sort of close, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, so there's some questions about how to do it, because the popular idea in Silicon Valley is basic income, and basic income is an old idea, but the traditional purpose of basic income was to address abject poverty. It was to try to address those who, for whatever reason, simply didn't succeed in whatever the society system was. But the new idea is a much more ambitious form of basic income, which would replace like the ordinary person, the middle class person's life. And it sounds attractive to people, but I think on some fundamental sort of spiritual level, there's something kind of cruel about it, because it's this tiny elite of people who happen to own the big computers telling everybody else, well, since we're running the society now, none of you are needed, or you'll all be just regimented. We'll take your data and then use it to run your lives, and you'll all live on our largesse, and you're useless, and it's just our kindness that keeps you alive, or something like that. It's a horrible message, and it's based on a lie, because these systems still need the participation and data of a ton of people in order to run. So we have this alternative idea. It's sometimes known by the moniker data as labor. That's what it's being called in the formal economics world. And this idea that if you just pay people for their value, even in the data economy, maybe we don't need to even think about this. Maybe we can extend the idea of markets in a way that is really inclusive of people. And it's a funny thing. It used to be that Silicon Valley was very lefty, like back in the
Right.
80s. Everybody was a socialist, and then they would have hated this because they're saying, well, why are you bringing the market into it? We should use computers to kill markets. And then it was hyper libertarian for a while, but now it's just cyber supremacy. It's like it's not even libertarian. It's just like the geeks should run things and everybody else should just shut up. Totally different. And in a sense, I'm trying to find a path that pushes markets, pushes the libertarian idea so far that it transforms into something else, and at the same time, if you like, pushes the idea of a social safety net so far it transforms into something else. I really think we're forging an idea for a way to have a high-tech society that might be better. I don't want to claim to have all the answers or claim to have anything perfect, but I'm getting excited. I think we're getting somewhere. There was a good write-up of our work in The Economist, and they even had a cover about it last week. Like the mainstream econ community is suddenly getting these ideas after years. It's finally breaking through, and I don't know. Like maybe we're going to get somewhere.
Well, it's interesting because I see a lot of progress. I know I wrote a piece in 2014 for Salon suggesting that some of the big tech companies should be regulated as public utilities, and
Hmm.
people thought, which is a mild idea in today's environment, people thought I was insane, and those people that noticed the piece, and then someone else picked it up about 6 months later, and now that's like commonplace. That's the moderate, that's the moderate position. I think that the awareness is a huge piece of it. And when I think about why it is that people think about take this cyber supremacy approach, I can't help but think, Jaron Lanier, that it's closely related. Not that these are necessarily bad people advocating this, but that it's closely related to the concept of artificial intelligence itself, which I've always been a skeptic about, going back to the 80s, really, or late 80s. I used to say there was something called naugahyde, which was an artificial leather you put on sofas and chairs.
Yeah.
And I used to say artificial intelligence is intelligence the way naugahyde is an artificial cow. You're taking an output and confusing it for the thing. But I think if you believe that you can create consciousness, or that consciousness is similarly, this is why I hate the Turing test, because the Turing test is simply the simulation of consciousness that fools people. But if you think the simulation is good enough to be real, it puts you in a state where you don't feel inhumane, thinking pretty awful things about your fellow human beings. At least that's how it seems to me. Am I off base? Or?
No, I've been arguing about this AI thing. I mean, my most important mentor was the guy who made up most of the mythology of AI. His name was Marvin Minsky from MIT. He just passed away, and I adored him, although, of course, we disagreed very much about the storytelling aspect of AI. AI is a story we tell about software we wrote. It's not really a thing in itself. It shouldn't be treated as a real thing. It's just a particular storytelling or mythological wrapper around software we write. And I've argued a lot about, whether consciousness is real and whether we can sort of, in a sense, murder ourselves by not believing in our own consciousness because we want to believe in this AI thing. And AI has really become a new religion in every sense. People think they'll get immortality because they'll be uploaded into the big computer and all this nonsense. But the core pragmatic reason to oppose AI is, A, it makes you into a bad engineer, because if the program's alive, you have to just respect it as a living thing. You can no longer make demands of it that it function in a particular way if it's like a person. And so therefore you can't engineer it, so it makes software into crap. So that's reason number one. And that happens in practice all the time. Anything that's called AI is less usable and less comprehensible than the alternative that's focused on good user interface. But the second reason is that to believe in AI is to turn yourself into a thief. It destroys your own moral and ethical grounding. And the easiest way to see that, I have found, is by telling the story of language translators. So the people who translate, say, between English and French have seen their livelihoods destroyed, very much like recording musicians or investigative journalists. They're at about a tenth of where they were. Most are out of work. Very few do well. And the reason why is we can provide automated little translations of things like business memos, which used to be their bread and butter. But in order to provide those automated memos, we need to steal tens of millions of example phrase translations every single day from people who happen to do translations. We don't tell them we're doing it. They have no idea. They aren't paid. And it's the mashup of all of those sample things. And it has to be every day because the language is constantly in motion because of pop culture and current events and slang and all kinds of things. So they're still needed. They're not the proverbial buggy whips. They're actually needed. And yet we're telling them they're not needed because this electronic brain is replacing them. And so in order to believe in the electronic brain, we have to become a thief and harm these people and steal from them. So therefore, the belief in AI is not ethical. It's a bad belief. It makes software into crap and it steals from people. So I just think we should not be having a conversation about it. We should just talk about programs we can write and what they do. So that point of view seems like very straightforward and commonsensical to me, but it's been considered radical. Recently, it's really funny when I just say that to like a software engineer or a computer scientist. I say, well, AI isn't really a thing. It's just a story we tell about the code we write. All of a sudden, it's like, oh my God, that's right. We can just think of it as storytelling. It's like it hasn't even occurred to them that it might be a big fake. So, but I do feel like I'm starting to get through. So it's kind of cool.
AI is in the eye of the beholder. The last topic, I think, Jaron Lanier, one of my favorite, well, we could talk about so much here, but one of my favorite little anecdotes from your childhood begins one evening. There was a perfect breakdown of the local telephone system. You know what, anyone who picked up a phone could hear everyone else all at once, and then you describe how an instant society of children formed, brilliantly superior to any I'd experienced before. The floating children were curious about one another. They were friendly. The voice of a little boy said, "I've hugged every woman in the world as a pillow," which is, wow. And this was with real girls floating nearby. Okay, but so, in other words, you experienced a kind of primordial internet by technological mistake, and it was good, But now we're seeing, and I'm old enough to remember the idealistic days when people thought that connecting everybody on computers was going to bring paradise, certain. And everybody would have instant access to communication. Information could travel around the world at light speed. We now know that, or I suspect that the only thing that travels faster than information on the internet is misinformation, and because it's more adhesive, it's more attractive. But that's my personal theory. But what do we do? It seems like there's still a sentimental attachment in certain quarters to the idealized internet and not a recognition of problems of... Now, I personally think we make the discussion of fake news very ideological and single out one small dimension of it, which is, foreign fake news. But in the broadest sense, misinformation and intentional deception, that's a serious problem. It really is, isn't it?
Well, we have a horrific problem, and the core of the problem is that the business model of two of the tech giants, which are specifically Google and Facebook, is to manipulate people for pay, and so they're optimized to manipulate people. So they call themselves advertising businesses, but it's not really advertising. When you have constant measurement of people and then constant adjustments to feedback, you're really creating a behaviorist's experiment. You're directly manipulating behavior. You're not just putting out an advertising message. And so the thing is, when you optimize these giant businesses to do that thing for pay, it becomes as if you've signed on with a hypnotist who's actually working in secret for a third party you don't know about. But the thing is, it's like laying out a welcome mat for bad actors, because that whole thing is optimized to manipulate people. And so it's very easy for somebody to come in at low cost and disrupt a society. And so far as we can tell, Russian intelligence services wished to do that and succeeded. And not only here, but in various European and other world situations. And it's a dastardly problem. It has to be fixed, or there simply cannot be democracy. It's cheaper and easier to create a massive fake message than a real message in the current situation. But at the core, I think the problem is not the internet per se. It's not having digital information systems. It's the business model of certain companies, and it's not all the tech companies. It's not Amazon or Apple. It's not a lot of them. It's really Facebook, Google, Twitter, and so when the central media of the time have become behavior manipulation closed loop systems that are easily used by third parties. It's, you might say, well, couldn't the good, well-intended people use those things too? And the answer is no. The systems make better use of negative emotions than they do positive ones. They're more easily applied to disruption than construction. They're optimized to favor the worst actors. And so that'll keep happening until we change the underlying business models and the incentives for those companies. I don't see any other way for democracy to exist in the future.
Well, I think you've answered what was going to be my follow-up question, which is, I think that what I'm seeing from the efforts to suppress bad actors, and I would say Russia is one of them, but by no means the only one, then I think what I've observed is an ideological application, selective application of, for some reason, the oligarchy in Russia, because they've interfered and sent these messages out. Let's go after, for example, independent left-wing presses that have no love for the oligarchy in Russia. That sort of, it's always going to be, any attempt to tinker without changing the underlying model is always going to be fraught with risks to freedom of speech and democracy and all that. So does that mean we have to actually just change those companies completely?
The only way to have a decent society or any legitimate concept of democracy is for Google and Facebook to change their business models. They must cease to be behavior modification empires. They could, for instance, ask people to pay for their services with subscriptions. They could pay people for their contributions and become part of the normal economy instead of this weird new manipulation level of the world. But they simply have to. It's not survivable to let Google, Facebook, and Twitter continue to function in the way they are. Now, Twitter's not even really succeeding as a business, so that one might take care of itself. But Google and Facebook simply must be modified. The people are cool at both companies. I mean, just to be clear, I'm part of this world. I've sold a company to Google. I'm a Silicon Valley insider. So it's not useful to treat the people at these companies as villains, but it's very useful to treat their business model as villainous, which is an entirely different matter.
There is only one way in which it's useful to treat these people as villains, which is you get more clicks that way.
And one shouldn't.
And one should, right? It's not a way to. It's not a way to communicate.
We have to rise above that way of thinking, but we have to get them to change their business model in order for us to survive.
Okay, well, I think that's a compelling message to end on. There are a million more things we could talk about, but as always, great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me on. It's really lovely. I really appreciate your being interested in it.
The guest is Jaron Lanier. The book is The Dawn of the New Everything. And again, thank you. Great to talk to you.